Good morning, boys and girls. So today we are going to start off by talking about our vocabulary words in the story we're reading that is called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. So our first vocabulary word is sandbank. A sandbank is an area where sand forms in a shallow area in a river. So right where the water meets the sand, that is the sandbank. Our next vocabulary word is called sieve. A sieve is a utensil that is made of plastic or metal used to strain solids from liquid. So right here, this little girl, she is taking sugar and she is making it thinner through the sieve to put on her cupcakes. Our next vocabulary word is called wheelbarrow. A wheelbarrow is a small cart with a single wheel at the front and two stands in the back. A wheelbarrow helps to carry loads of different things when gardening or building. Our next vocabulary word is evening. The evening is the period of time at the end of the day. This is when we would typically go to bed, we would eat dinner. Our last vocabulary word is garden. A garden is a small piece of ground used to grow vegetables, fruits, herbs, and flowers. Herbs are different kinds of plants that we use to cook.
Once upon a time, there was 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into any mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Peter sneeze. Kershoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon the Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he has tired of running. Can you stop it? Presently, Peter sneezed. Kershoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Screech! Scratch, scratch, scratch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end.
Now that we've read our story, the tale of Peter Rabbit, we are now going to write a letter to Peter Rabbit. Now, let's get with your partners, your elbow partners, and let's talk about what we loved about the story of Peter Rabbit. Okay, now start. Okay, now that we have talked about what we liked, and I really enjoyed all of your responses. I heard that we loved Peter Rabbit because he was adventurous. You know, maybe he got in trouble a little bit. He didn't do what he was supposed to do, but he ended up going home at the end of the night, and he got sick because of it, because he didn't do what he was supposed to. But I heard really good responses. So now we are going to write our letter to Peter Rabbit. Who remembers how we write a letter? Okay, so how we write a letter is we are going to take our piece of paper. Now everybody look up at the screen. And we are going to write. Now before we go back to our seats and write our own letter, let's write our letter together so we can refresh our minds about how to write a letter. So first we need to start with our greeting. And our greeting usually says, dear. And we're gonna write, who are you writing to? Yes, that's right. We're writing to Peter Rabbit. And what do we need at the end of rabbit? Yes, a comma. So we're going to say, Dear Peter Rabbit. And now you're not going to write what I'm going to write. I'm just showing you an example. I'm going to say, I hope you are staying out of trouble. I had a really fun day at school today. And what do we need at the end of our sentences? Yes, periods. We need periods. And I'm also going to say, I'm going to ask Peter Rabbit a question. How was your day? And when we ask a question, we need a question mark. And now I'm going to say, this evening, am I using a vocabulary word? Now, I want you to use a vocabulary word when you're doing your writing, and I'm going to put a bubble around it because I used a vocabulary word. So this evening, my mom is baking a cake. Look, I have my period. Now I'm going to tell him, I am so excited. Now I'm going to put an exclamation point because I'm really excited. Now I'm going to put my closing. So I'm going to say, love, Miss Rivera. So now that we've written a letter together and we've refreshed our minds about how to write a letter, you are going to go back to your seats and you are going to write a letter to Peter Rabbit. Now, you can write whatever you want in your letter. However, I would really love if you tried to use a vocabulary word in your writing. Okay, you can make it however long you want, but I would love if you used a vocabulary word. So now we are going to go back to our seats. Team captains, come get papers and go back to your seats, and then we will start writing, and I will be walking around making sure you're using vocabulary words, you have your greeting, and you have your closing of your letter. Now, ready, set, go. Now that everyone is all done writing their letters, let's sing our song together, okay? The song that we are going to sing is called, what song is it? Yes, it is called The Tale of Peter Rabbit, but it's a sing-along, right? It's called Little Peter Rabbit.